The crack of rifle fire shattered the Kazakhstan dawn. 4 bodies hit the ground in rapid succession, their blood darkening the dust. Morgan Reed felt the impact in her shoulder before she heard the shot, a burning sensation followed by sudden wetness. She didn't scream. Her mind was already calculating the bullet's trajectory, working backward to identify the shooter's position. Morgan dragged Rachel, still breathing but unconscious, behind a crumbling concrete wall as bullets chipped away at their meager cover. Her fingers found the wound in her own shoulder, assessing damage, even as her eyes scanned the ridge 800 meters away. The shooter would adjust position after the next 3 shots. Standard protocol for a professional team. Through her scope, Morgan spotted a flash of movement exactly where her calculations predicted. She steadied her breath, waited for the precise moment between heartbeats, and squeezed the trigger. The recoil sent fire through her wounded shoulder, but her aim was true. The distant figure collapsed. Too late, Morgan whispered to herself, looking at her fallen team. Michael, Dominic, and Kate lay motionless in the dirt. Only Rachel still clung to lifeblood bubbling from her lips. "Stay with me," Morgan urged, pressing a field dressing against Rachel's chest wound. But the light was already fading from her eyes. "They knew. We were coming," Rachel gasped. "Someone told them." The ground beneath them trembled as the first explosion hit. Morgan knew she had approximately 47 seconds before the entire compound would be engulfed. Not enough time to save anyone but herself. Yet she tried anyway, dragging Rachel's limp form toward the extraction point, even as her own blood left a dark trail in the dust. 4 years later, I would face the man who betrayed us. But I didn't know that yet. Every morning at precisely 0600 hours, Sergeant Morgan Reed unfolded her weathered camping chair on the rooftop of Forward Operating Base Sentinel in the dusty outskirts of Kandahar province. From this perch, she methodically cleaned her M24 sniper rifle as the Afghan sun painted the mountains gold. The ritual never varied: strong black coffee from a dented thermos box, cello suite number 1, playing through a single earbud, and meticulous preparation for another day of Overwatch. The rifle came apart in her hands with the familiar intimacy of a lover. Each piece was inspected with scientific precision, her slender fingers working with mechanical efficiency. Few at FOB Sentinel knew that those same hands had once built experimental ballistics algorithms at MIT, or that behind her quiet demeanor was a mind that could calculate complex trajectories faster than military supercomputers. "Morning, Reed," came a gravelly voice from behind her. Morgan didn't turn. She'd already identified Master Sergeant William Hawkins by his distinctive footsteps, the slight drag of his right foot from an old shrapnel wound in Fallujah 2004. "Hawkins," she acknowledged, continuing her work. At 58, Hawkins was a relic from another era of warfare, a Vietnam-born lifer with 3 decades of combat experience etched into the lines of his weathered face. He was also the only person at FOB Sentinel who knew about Nightshade. "Command sent new orders," Hawkins said, lowering himself into a squat beside her chair with a grunt of effort. "They want us to extend patrols into the Eastern Valley. Intelligence suggests increased Taliban movement." Morgan nodded, her eyes never leaving the rifle components laid out before her. "That valley is a ballistic nightmare. Unpredictable wind patterns, multiple elevation changes, cross currents near the river bend." Hawkins' mouth twitched, the closest he ever came to smiling. "Already calculated the variables, haven't you?" She didn't answer. They both knew she had. When Hawkins spoke again, his voice dropped to just above a whisper. "Got a message through unofficial channels. Someone's been asking about former Nightshade operatives." Morgan's hand stilled for a fraction of a second, imperceptible to anyone but Hawkins, who noticed everything. "Nightshade was decommissioned 4 years ago," she said, her tone neutral. "So they tell us?" Hawkins rose with another grunt. "Just watch your 6, Reed. Some ghosts don't stay buried." As Hawkins limped away, Morgan resumed her work, fingers moving with methodical precision. But her mind was elsewhere, back in a classified training facility deep beneath Quantico, where she and 11 other mathematical prodigies had been molded into something new: precision weapons, who could calculate death with unparalleled accuracy. Nightshade, the classified program that had recruited her directly from MIT's Applied Physics Department. Colonel Thomas Chase had spotted her potential when she corrected a ballistics formula during a military recruitment presentation. Within weeks, she was part of a clandestine initiative to develop human computers who could make impossible shots by calculating variables no machine could process. For 3 years, Morgan had been Nightshade 7, the most gifted calculator among them. Until Kazakhstan. The distant sound of a helicopter approaching the base pulled her back to the present. Morgan reassembled her rifle with practiced efficiency, each piece clicking into place with satisfying precision. Another day in Afghanistan, another day pretending to be nothing more than a competent Marine Corps sniper, rather than what she truly was, a mathematical anomaly capable of calculations that defied conventional physics. The officers' mess buzzed with the usual morning activities, coffee being poured, mission parameters, discussed rookies being hazed by veterans. Morgan sat alone, mechanically consuming a breakfast. She barely tasted, her attention divided between the tablet, displaying the day's weather data, and the new batch of lieutenants who had arrived overnight. One in particular caught her attention, a broad-shouldered West Point graduate with a swagger that radiated arrogance. Lieutenant James Collins. His personnel file had crossed her desk yesterday, distinguished marksman, top of his class in tactical analysis, family connections to 3 generals. The kind who believed book knowledge trumped field experience. "That's Reed," she heard someone whisper to Collins. "Reconnaissance specialist, keeps to herself." "The woman sniper," Collins replied, not bothering to lower his voice. "Heard about her. Good shot, but they say she's weird. Some kind of math geek." Morgan showed no reaction, though she had calculated precisely how many steps it would take to cross the room and exactly where to apply pressure to render Collins unconscious in 2.7 seconds. Such calculations came automatically now, a side effect of her nightshade conditioning. Captain Marcus Harrington approached her table, interrupting her thoughts. "Reed got a minute? Having an issue with the Barrett. Armory claims it's fine, but the grouping is off at range." Morgan nodded and followed Harrington out, aware of Collins watching them leave. The Barrett M82A1 was laid out on a workbench in the armory, its massive frame dominating the small space. "Been pulling right consistently at 800 plus, Harrington explained, handing her the shot records. "Mackenzie says I'm anticipating recoil, but I've run this platform for years." Morgan examined the rifle, her fingers tracing the barrel with scientific detachment. Then she picked up the scope, studied it briefly, and made a precise 3.7 milliradian adjustment to the elevation turret before replacing it with steady hands. "Try it now," she said quietly. Harrington looked skeptical. "That's it." The scope's internal gyroscope was calibrated for northern hemisphere rotation at sea level. "We're at 150 meters elevation here. The Coriolis effect is different." A low whistle from the doorway announced Collins's presence. "Pretty fancy theory for a field adjustment, Sergeant." Morgan turned, her face expressionless. Collins stepped closer, the smirk evident in his voice. "You sure you're not just following the manual for that weapon system? Barrett has specific protocols for elevation compensation." "The manual is wrong," Morgan replied evenly. Collins laughed. "The manual developed by ballistics experts with decades of experience is wrong, but you figured it out in 30 seconds. "Yes." The lieutenant's smirk faltered slightly at her calm certainty. "Well, let's see if your little tweak actually works." 30 minutes later, they stood at the firing range. Harrington squeezed the trigger. The Barrett roared, its massive recoil absorbed by the shooter's stance. Through her spotting scope, Morgan watched the round strike dead center on a target about 200 meters distant. "Son of a bitch," Harrington muttered, firing again. The second shot formed a neat hole next to the first. "How did you know?" Morgan was already walking away. "Just experience?" she called over her shoulder. Behind her, she heard Collins say, "Lucky guess," or she read it somewhere and is playing mysterious. She didn't bother correcting him. Let them think what they wanted. Think. The truth, that she had mentally calculated the precise angular deviation caused by differences in gravitational pull, atmospheric density, and planetary rotation at their specific latitude and elevation, would only lead to questions she couldn't answer. Back in her private quarters, Morgan locked the door and retrieved a small metal case from beneath her bunk. The biometric lock responded to her thumbprint, revealing a customized tablet computer unlike any standard military issue. The screen displayed complex atmospheric modeling algorithms, proprietary trajectory analysis software, and optical calibration systems that would make DARPA researchers envious. This was her real work. The calculations and simulations that kept her mind sharp, that prepared her for variables others couldn't even identify. The Marines in her unit saw nothing more than a competent sniper who hit her targets and filed concise reports. They had no idea they were working alongside one of the most mathematically gifted ballistics experts the Marine Corps had ever recruited. Morgan preferred it this way. After Kazakhstan, she had deliberately disappeared into the anonymous ranks of conventional forces, seeking assignments where nobody would ask about her past or question her methods. 8 years of carefully constructed military identity had given her something she'd never had in her classified role: simplicity. The freedom to focus solely on the precision of each shot without the burden of explaining her methodologies to skeptical superior officers. That simplicity was about to shatter. Late Thursday afternoon, as Morgan was cataloging ammunition in the armory, her secure satellite phone vibrated with an incoming transmission. The caller used an encryption protocol she hadn't seen in 4 years. Sierra 111, said a male voice using her official designation rather than her name. Morgan felt her pulse quicken, but kept her voice steady. This line is not secure for that designation. Echo actual requests Nightshade support at grid reference Kilo 7903. Confirm receipt. The voice belonged to Jack Rivers, former Nightshade 4. They had trained together at Quantico before being deployed to separate theaters. Last she'd heard, he had taken a security consultant position after the program was disbanded. Receipt confirmed, Morgan responded automatically. Muscle memory from years of covert operations taking over. Time frame immediate, dust off unavailable, situation critical. The line went dead. Morgan stared at the phone, her mind racing through possibilities. Nightshade had been officially decommissioned after Kazakhstan. All operatives reassigned, all records classified beyond top secret. Yet here was Rivers using old call signs and protocols for an off-books operation. It could be a trap. It could be a test. It could be legitimate. Grid reference Kilo 793 corresponded to a remote village about 40 kilometers from FOB Sentinel. Barely on their operational maps. No strategic value that she knew of. Morgan made her decision. She requisitioned a vehicle for reconnaissance patrol and sought out a young corporal named Ryan Reynolds, who had proven himself both competent and discreet during previous operations. Routine patrols, sir, Reynolds asked as they prepared the Humvee. Something like that, Morgan replied. Pack extra ammo and the long-range comms. Could be a late night. Reynolds nodded, asking no further questions. That was why she had chosen him. As they drove away from FOB Sentinel, Morgan felt a familiar tension building at the base of her skull. The same sensation she'd experienced before every Nightshade operation. Her mind automatically began calculating variables, distance, terrain, potential, threat assessments, optimal approach, vectors. The village sat nestled in a valley that barely appeared on military maps. As they approached in the Humvee, Morgan immediately sensed something wrong. The normally bustling market was completely deserted, as if everyone had received advance warning of something dangerous approaching. Ghost town? Reynolds muttered, his hand instinctively moving closer to his weapon. Recent evacuation, too. Those cook fires are still warm. Morgan scanned the surrounding ridge lines, her trained eye picking out possible sniper positions, fields of fire escape routes. Set up observation on that eastern ridge. Establish comms with base, but report only to me first. Yes, Sergeant. A nervous officer in unmarked fatigues met them at the village perimeter, introducing himself only as Miller. He refused to provide unit identification, mumbling something about a high-value target before disappearing into an abandoned schoolhouse. As Morgan began setting up her observation post on the low ridge overlooking the village center, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. A distinctive pattern of small mirror flashes from 3 separate buildings using a signal sequence she recognized instantly. This particular pattern was only used by Shadow Operations Group, an ultra-classified direct action team that officially didn't exist. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her scope, scanning the deserted streets and alleyways. Hidden carefully within the village's central well, she spotted something even more disturbing. A modified surveillance drone with specialized acoustic sensors, the kind used exclusively by covert intelligence gathering units. Attached to the drone was a small metallic disc with precise military markings etched into its surface. NS-7. Escimitar read NS-7. Nightshade 7, her old operational designation from the program that was supposedly decommissioned years ago. The disc slipped from her shaking fingers, clattering onto the rocky ground. For 3 years, she'd been Staff Sergeant Morgan Reed, a highly specialized reconnaissance sniper, serving with the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force. During one catastrophically failed operation in Kazakhstan, 4 of her closest teammates had died because someone in intelligence had given them fatally inaccurate information about enemy force strength and positions. Morgan had barely survived taking a bullet through her shoulder and spending 6 months in rehabilitation. The guilt and trauma had nearly destroyed her. She'd transferred units, changed specialties slightly, and deliberately disappeared into the anonymous ranks of conventional military forces. She'd requested 3 consecutive deployments to increasingly remote forward operating bases, looking for assignments where nobody would ask questions about her past. She thought she had successfully buried Nightshade 7 forever in the predictable routines of a standard reconnaissance unit. Apparently, Nightshade wasn't finished with her yet. She didn't tell Corporal Reynolds about her discovery when he returned with supplies. She didn't tell Captain Miller when he radioed for a situation report. She simply slipped the mysterious disc into her pocket and continued setting up her observation post with methodical precision. That night, after ensuring her position was secure and Reynolds was keeping watch, she extracted a specialized communications module from her equipment bag, standard issue for snipers, but hers had been modified in ways the Marine Corps supply officer would never recognize. With trembling fingers, she entered the alphanumeric sequence from the disk into her encrypted system. After several tense seconds, the small screen flickered and displayed a chilling message. Nightshade operative confirmed. Hamlet protocol activated. Prairie fire imminent. Immediate extraction required. Morgan immediately shut down the communication system, removed the cryptographic module, and methodically buried it beneath a small pile of rocks behind her position. The cold night air bit at her face as she stared out across the darkened valley, processing what she just learned. She knew exactly what prairie fire meant. It was the code word for an imminent, overwhelming attack by superior enemy forces. The same code word that had been used in her final mission with the Scimitar team just before everything went catastrophically wrong in Kazakhstan. The same people who had promised her that Nightshade was officially decommissioned. The same people who had sworn that her classified past would never follow her to these remote mountains where she'd finally found some measure of peace. But judging by that ominous message, people were going to die if she didn't act on this intelligence. As she stared up at the star-filled Afghan sky, Morgan realized that by sunrise, this quiet village would become a killing field. Based on the Hamlet protocol designation, she knew exactly what kind of operation was underway, a high-level assassination mission targeting someone hidden in this village, someone important enough to risk significant American military assets. And based on her prior experience, she knew the kind of dangerous visitors who would follow, the kind who arrive without warning, eliminate their targets with extreme prejudice, and disappear like ghosts leaving civilians to face the inevitable retribution that follows. At exactly 0430 hours, her thermal scope detected the first signs of movement, not from the village, but from the surrounding ridgelines. Dozens of heat signatures moving with tactical discipline, establishing overlapping fields of fire around the entire village perimeter. Morgan had been expecting something like this. She'd spent the sleepless night preparing calculating fields of fire, identifying optimal engagement positions, and establishing multiple fallback routes. Her carefully constructed peaceful military career was about to be torn apart, but at least she wouldn't face this threat unprepared. She gently shook Corporal Reynolds awake, noting the confusion in his young face as she briefed him with the calm precision that had become her trademark. We have multiple hostiles establishing positions on all surrounding ridgelines. I count at least 60 distinct heat signatures, possibly more concealed by terrain features. They're setting up a perfect ambush perimeter. Reynolds peered through his binoculars, his face paling as he spotted the first confirmation of her assessment, the glint of a machine gun being positioned on the northern ridge. Sir, that's not Taliban. Their movements are too disciplined, too coordinated. No, Morgan agreed quietly. They're not Taliban, and they're not here for us. They're here for whoever is hiding in that village. She made a quick decision. Reynolds, I need you to get back to the Humvee and radio for immediate air support. Authentication code Sierra Tango 973. Specify Prairie Fire Protocol. The young corporal looked confused. Ma'am, that's a Tier 1 emergency extraction code. How do you even know? Just do it, Corporal, now. As Reynolds scrambled down the ridge toward their vehicle, Morgan continued her methodical scan of the surroundings. Her trained eye counted not 60 but 91 distinct enemy combatants establishing firing positions around the village. Their equipment wasn't standard Taliban issue. They carried modern tactical gear, advanced optical systems, and were deploying with a level of sophistication that suggested extensive professional training. Whoever they weren't ordinary insurgents. They were highly trained mercenaries or special forces from another country here for something or someone of extraordinary value. Morgan settled into her shooting position, the familiar weight of the M24 against her shoulder bringing a strange calm. Her mind automatically calculated distance elevation, humidity, temperature, and wind speed. The complex mathematics of long-range ballistics translating instantly into minute adjustments to her scope. The village remained eerily silent as dawn approached. Then, just as the first rays of sunlight crested the eastern mountains, three black-clad figures emerged from the schoolhouse where Miller had disappeared. They moved with the distinctive precision of American Special Operations Forces, escorting a fourth figure whose face was concealed by a hood, a high-value target extraction just as she'd suspected. But what the American team clearly didn't know was that they were walking into a perfectly executed trap. 91 enemy combatants waited in concealed positions ready to unleash devastating crossfire the moment the Americans reached the planned extraction point. Morgan keyed her radio hoping to warn the team, but received only static in response. Someone was jamming all communications in the area. In that moment, Sergeant Morgan Reed faced a devastating choice: remain hidden and watch an American team be slaughtered, potentially sacrificing whatever crucial intelligence the hooded figure possessed, or reveal her position by taking action, exposing herself to both the enemy force and the classified operation she was never supposed to know about. The mathematics of the situation were brutally clear. One sniper, even an exceptional one, against 91 enemy combatants. The logical conclusion was inescapable: intervention meant certain death. But as the American team moved closer to the ambush point, Morgan remembered the faces of her 4 teammates who had died in that previous ambush years ago. She remembered the weight of survivor's guilt that had followed her across 3 continents. She made her decision. Through her scope, Morgan identified the most immediate threat: a heavy machine gun position on the northern ridge that would have a clear firing line on the American team in exactly 73 seconds, based on their current pace. Morgan took a deep breath, exhaled halfway, and squeezed the trigger with mechanical precision. The shot echoed across the valley like a thunderclap, instantly killing the machine gunner before he could react. In the moment of confusion that followed, Morgan executed a rapid series of follow-up shots, eliminating 3 more key enemy positions before they could identify her location. The mathematics of ballistic trajectories, wind compensation, and bullet drop calculations flowed through her mind with crystalline clarity. Each shot was a complex equation solved in milliseconds, each trigger pull perfectly timed between heartbeats. But physics was unforgiving. The enemy force quickly triangulated her position and began returning fire, forcing her to relocate rapidly across the ridgeline. As bullets impacted around her, Morgan maintained her methodical precision, prioritizing targets that posed the greatest threat to the American extraction team. 8 minutes into the engagement, Reynolds returned with news that air support was 30 minutes out. Far too late to make a difference. The young corporal's eyes widened as he witnessed Morgan's impossible shooting performance, her rifle cracking in a steady rhythm that defied human limitations. "How are you calculating those shots so quickly?" he gasped as she eliminated a target at 1,475 meters, well beyond the M24's effective range under normal conditions. Morgan didn't respond. Her entire consciousness had narrowed to the task at hand, identifying threats, calculating solutions, executing with precision. The complex mathematics of wind drift, Coriolis effect, humidity variables, and bullet energy degradation flowed through her mind in an unbroken stream. 17 minutes into the engagement, the American extraction team had reached cover near the village center, but remained pinned down by concentrated enemy fire. Despite Morgan's extraordinary shooting, the remaining enemy forces had established interlocking fields of fire that made movement suicidal. The mathematics remained brutally clear. One sniper, no matter how skilled, could not overcome such overwhelming numerical superiority. Then Morgan spotted something that changed the equation. The enemy force had deployed a mobile command center behind the southern ridge, a modified truck with advanced communications equipment. Based on the enemy's disciplined responses, she deduced this was their tactical coordination center. The shot was nearly impossible. 890 meters through gusting crosswinds with significant bullet drop over that distance. The M24 wasn't designed for such extreme range engagement, but Morgan wasn't calculating like a normal sniper. Her mind processed variables that others couldn't even identify: the microscopic expansion of the rifle barrel from previous shots, the exact density variation of the air mile across the valley, the infinitesimal gravitational differences at their current elevation. She made 7-minute adjustments to her scope, each one representing a complex calculation that would have taken a ballistics computer several seconds to process. One shot, one mathematical solution that might change the equation of survival. Morgan took a deep breath, visualized the bullet's exact trajectory through three-dimensional space, and squeezed the trigger with perfect mechanical precision. The bullet traveled for 3.27 seconds, its path arcing through space exactly as she had calculated. It struck the communications array on the command vehicle with surgical precision, disabling the enemy's tactical coordination capabilities instantly. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Without centralized command and control, the disciplined enemy force fragmented into isolated units, their coordinated fire patterns dissolving into ineffective individual actions. 23 minutes after Morgan's first shot, the extraction team reached their fallback position with a hooded, high-value target. 37 minutes after the first shot, helicopter gunships appeared on the horizon, forcing the remaining enemy combatants to retreat into the surrounding mountains. As medical evacuation helicopters landed in the village center, Morgan and Reynolds made their way down from their position to join the extraction. The special operations team leader, a grizzled veteran with piercing eyes, approached her with an expression of barely concealed shock. "Sierra 11, he asked, using her official call sign rather than her name. Morgan nodded, her rifle still warm against her shoulder. "That was you on the ridgeline." He shook his head in disbelief. "Command told us we were completely on our own until air support arrived. How did you calculate those shots? That last one was nearly 2 clicks through variable winds." Before she could respond, the team leader was called away to secure the high-value target for transport. But as he turned to leave, he said something that sent a chill through Morgan's exhausted body. "Nightshade protocols have been reactivated. Full briefing at Bagram." As the helicopters lifted off carrying the special operations team and their mysterious captive, Morgan stood in the dust of their departure, the weight of her rifle suddenly heavy in her hands. 8 years of carefully constructed military anonymity crumbled in the dust cloud rising from the helicopter rotors. She knew exactly what awaited her at Bagram Air Base. The same people who had promised her that Nightshade was officially decommissioned, the same people who had sworn that her classified past would never follow her back to the conventional forces, where she'd finally found some measure of peace. But as the sun climbed higher over the Afghan mountains, Sergeant Morgan Reed realized that tomorrow would bring visitors she had prayed she would never see again. The kind of dangerous visitors who don't arrive in standard military transports, the kind who come in unmarked aircraft with classified orders and unlimited authority, the kind who don't take no for an answer. At exactly 1300 hours the next day, an unmarked C-17 transport aircraft touched down at Bagram Air Base. No flight plan had been filed, no arrival announced. 6 figures in civilian clothing emerged from the aircraft and walked directly to the secure operations center without passing through standard security protocols. Morgan had been expecting them. She'd spent the sleepless night preparing mentally for this moment, knowing that her carefully constructed military career was about to be torn apart. She stood at parade rest outside the command office, watching as the figures approached with the measured pace of people accustomed to authority beyond question. A tall woman in her 50s led the group, her silver hair cut in a severe style that matched her expression. When she spoke, her voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone who regularly made life and death decisions affecting national security. "Nightshade 7, it's been 3 years, 4 months, and 16 days. She didn't offer her name. She didn't need to. Colonel Elizabeth Chase, director of the Asymmetric Warfare Group's most classified division, was not someone Morgan would ever forget. Your ballistics calculations yesterday exceeded our most advanced predictive algorithms. 91 hostiles, 37 confirmed eliminations from your position, including a 2-kilometer shot through variable winds that our best computer models rated as a statistical impossibility. Colonel Chase paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the air between them. We need you back, Morgan. This isn't a request. Morgan remained silent for a long moment, studying the faces of the 6 officials surrounding her. She recognized the look in their eyes, a mixture of desperation and calculation, the expression of people who'd exhausted their conventional options and were now reaching for weapons they'd once deemed too dangerous to use. The target you helped extract yesterday wasn't just another high-value terrorist, Colonel Chase continued. He's a nuclear physicist who defected from an adversarial weapons program with critical intelligence. The enemy force wasn't standard insurgents. They were Spetsnaz-trained operatives working through cutouts and private military contractors. Chase gestured to a junior officer who handed Morgan a secure tablet displaying classified satellite imagery of a remote mountain complex. This is why they want him back so desperately, and this is why we need Nightshade operational again. The images showed what appeared to be a hardened underground facility built into a mountainside in a remote border region. Even with her untrained eye, Morgan could identify the distinctive features of a nuclear development site: specialized ventilation systems, radiation containment structures, and the unmistakable security perimeter that surrounded such facilities. How many other Nightshade operatives have you reactivated? Morgan asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. You're it, replied a tall man with close-cropped gray hair who stood slightly behind Chase. General Marcus Sullivan, Joint Special Operations Command. The program was officially terminated after the Kazakhstan incident. You're the only surviving operative with the specific skill set we need. The Kazakhstan incident, the mission that had killed her 4 teammates and left her with a bullet wound and crushing survivors' guilt. The classified operation that had gone catastrophically wrong because of intelligence failures at the highest levels. Colonel Chase stepped closer, lowering her voice. What happened 3 years ago was a tragedy, Sergeant Reed, but it wasn't your fault. The intelligence your team received was deliberately compromised by a mole within our organization. Morgan felt the ground shift beneath her feet. For 3 years, she'd carried the weight of those deaths, analyzing every decision she'd made, every shot she'd taken, every calculation that might have saved her team if she'd been faster, more accurate, more prescient. We identified the mole 6 months after you transferred out, General Sullivan added. He's been neutralized, but the damage was extensive. Several of our most sensitive operations were compromised, including the entire Nightshade program. Chase handed her another tablet, this one displaying personnel files with most details redacted. These are the people who died because of that compromise. Not just your team in Kazakhstan, but operatives across 3 continents. 37 American specialists lost because one man sold information to the highest bidder. Morgan studied the faces on the screen, recognizing several from joint operations she'd supported during her time with the program. The weight of this revelation settled over her like a physical burden. Why tell me this now? She asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. Because we need Nightshade operational again, Colonel Chase replied without hesitation. And because you deserve to know that what happened wasn't your failure, it was ours. The system failed you and your team, not the other way around. For 3 years, Morgan had believed that her teammates had died because she hadn't been good enough. Her calculations not precise enough, her shots not quick enough, her tactical assessments not accurate enough. Now she understood that no amount of skill or preparation could have saved them from a trap designed by their own command structure through a breach in security. The facility you see in those images, General Sullivan continued, houses technology that could alter the strategic balance of power in ways we cannot allow. Based on what our defector has told us, they're 6 months away from operational capability. Once that happens, the window for intervention closes permanently. The weight of this revelation crashed down on Morgan like a physical blow. She closed her eyes and saw the faces of her fallen teammates, Rachel, Michael, Dominic, and Kate. They died because the system had failed them. Now more people would die if that system failed again. If I do this, she said quietly, Afterward, you shut down Nightshade permanently. No more reactivation, no more special assignments, no more using people up and discarding them when they're broken. My record gets cleared, my identity secured, and I choose my next assignment without interference. Colonel Chase exchanged glances with General Sullivan, then nodded grimly. Agreed, but first we need to neutralize that facility before its technology becomes operational. As they prepared to brief her on the mission parameters, Morgan took one last look around the dusty base that had been her home for the past 14 months. She'd found a kind of peace here in the predictable rhythms of military life, in the straightforward mathematics of standard range shooting that required only a fraction of her true capabilities. She'd known this day would come eventually. Her skills were too valuable, too specialized, to remain buried forever. But this time she wasn't a traumatized soldier trying to prove herself. She was a woman who'd found peace and precision and was willing to risk everything to prevent a strategic catastrophe. The team transported her via secure helicopter to a classified operations center buried deep within Bagram Air Base, a facility that didn't appear on any official maps. As they descended into the reinforced bunker complex, Morgan noted the extreme security measures with professional detachment, retinal scanners, voice pattern recognition, and weight-sensitive floor panels that could detect the slightest deviation in an individual's gait. This wasn't standard military protocol. This was the kind of security reserved for operations that officially didn't exist. Inside the command center, a diverse team of specialists had assembled around a holographic terrain model of the target facility. Morgan recognized the distinctive work styles of various elite units, the methodical precision of Delta Force operators, the analytical focus of intelligence specialists, the technical expertise of advanced weapons technicians. The facility is built into a mountainside in the Wakhan corridor, explained Major Sarah Donovan, the operations intelligence officer. Multiple hardened layers, redundant security systems, and approximately 200 security personnel with military training. Morgan studied the holographic display, her mind automatically calculating angles, distances, and fields of fire. The facility had been deliberately positioned to minimize external vulnerabilities. No direct line of sight to critical areas. Multiple overlapping security zones and natural terrain features that channeled any approaching force into predetermined kill zones. Standard infiltration tactics won't work. She observed manipulating the holographic display to highlight the defensive positions. They've positioned anti-personnel measures here, and here, with overlapping fields of fire that eliminate any conventional approach vector. Major Donovan nodded grimly. That's why conventional options have been deemed unfeasible. A direct assault would result in unacceptable casualties and give them time to destroy critical evidence. An airstrike might not penetrate the hardened sections of the facility where the most sensitive technology is located. What about the thermal exhaust port? Asked a young technical specialist, pointing to a narrow opening on the eastern side of the facility. If we could place a precision munition there. Star Wars was a movie, Lieutenant, General Sullivan interjected dryly. Real-world weapons facilities don't have convenient exhaust ports that lead directly to their reactor cores. The room fell silent as everyone contemplated the seemingly impossible parameters of the mission. Then Morgan spoke, her voice quiet but clear. There is a way in, but it requires mathematics that most people would consider impossible. She stepped forward and manipulated the holographic display, highlighting a specific section of the mountainside above the facility. This geological formation is unstable, microfractures in the rock face that aren't visible to standard imaging. A precision impact at this exact point, delivered with sufficient kinetic energy at precisely the correct angle, would trigger a localized rock slide that would appear natural. Colonel Chase studied the indicated position skeptically. That's nearly 3 kilometers from the nearest viable firing position through a mountain valley with unpredictable wind patterns. No weapon system we have could deliver that kind of precision at that range. A Barrett M82A1 with custom-loaded match-grade ammunition could, Morgan replied, in the hands of someone who can calculate the exact atmospheric conditions, bullet drop, wind drift, and kinetic energy transfer required. She continued manipulating the holographic terrain. The rock slide would temporarily disable these 3 security systems, creating a 4-minute window for a small infiltration team to breach the outer perimeter here. Once inside, the team would have approximately 12 minutes to reach this access point before internal security protocols reset. The entire operation depends on the precision of that initial shot. If it impacts with too much energy or at the wrong angle, it triggers a larger geological event that could compromise the entire facility. Too little energy or the wrong placement, and the security systems remain active. General Sullivan studied her with newfound respect. You're talking about calculations that our best ballistics computers can't perform with that level of precision. The variables are too numerous, too complex. I'm not a computer, Morgan replied simply. I can account for variables that machines don't even recognize exist. For the next 6 hours, the team refined the operational plan based around Morgan's unprecedented shooting capability. Every aspect of the mission was calibrated to the split-second timing that her initial shot would enable. If she succeeded, a small Delta Force team would have a narrow window to infiltrate the facility, secure critical intelligence, and plant charges to destroy the most sensitive technology. If she failed, the entire operation would collapse before it began, with potentially catastrophic strategic consequences. As the planning session concluded, Colonel Chase took Morgan aside. I need to know with absolute certainty, can you make this shot not just hit the target, but deliver the exact kinetic impact required at precisely the right angle to trigger the specific geological effect we need? Morgan met her gaze steadily. 3 years ago, I would have said yes without hesitation because I had something to prove. Now I understand the true cost of overconfidence. She paused, considering her answer carefully. The shot is at the extreme edge of human capability. The mathematics involved exceed what most people can comprehend. But yes, I can make it. Not because I'm arrogant, but because I understand exactly what will happen if I don't. The infiltration team deployed 36 hours later, transported via stealth helicopter to a remote landing zone 50 kilometers from the target facility. From there, they traveled on foot through treacherous mountain terrain, avoiding known patrol routes and surveillance systems. Morgan moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had done this many times before, carrying her specialized equipment with practiced ease. The custom Barrett rifle had been modified to her exact specifications, each component precision machined to eliminate even microscopic inconsistencies that might affect accuracy. The ammunition had been hand-loaded under her direct supervision, each round a masterpiece of ballistic engineering. The brass case powder charge and projectile all calibrated to her mathematical models for this specific shot under these specific conditions. 28 hours after deployment, the team reached the designated firing position, a narrow ridge overlooking the valley that led to the target facility. As the Delta operators established security and communications, Morgan began methodically setting up her shooting platform. Every movement was precise, every adjustment calculated to eliminate variables that might affect her shot. The tripod was leveled to within 1/10 of a degree. The rifle was secured and tested for any shift that might occur during firing. Her custom-designed meteorological equipment measured wind speed, air pressure, humidity, and temperature at multiple points between her position and the target. You've got a 3-hour window before the facility shift change, Major Donovan reminded her through the secure communication system. After that, the increased movement of personnel will make the infiltration significantly more dangerous. Morgan acknowledged the information without breaking her concentration. Time was just another variable in her calculations. Important but no more critical than the hundreds of other factors she was processing simultaneously. For the next 2 hours, she observed, not just looking through her scope, but absorbing the patterns of the environment around her, the subtle shifts in wind direction as air currents moved through the valley, the gradual temperature changes as the sun's angle shifted, the almost imperceptible vibrations in the earth beneath her position. Where another sniper might have seen obstacles, Morgan saw data points. Each environmental factor fed into her mental calculations, building a four-dimensional model of the bullet's path through space and time. 1 hour to shift change, came the update in her earpiece. Morgan made a final series of minute adjustments to her scope, each one representing mathematical calculations so complex that they would require supercomputers several minutes to process. Her mind worked through differential equations that accounted for the Coriolis effect, the Earth's curvature, the microscopic expansion of the rifle barrel from ambient temperature, and dozens of other variables that conventional ballistics ignored. 30 minutes to shift change. She took a deep breath, her heartbeat slowing as she entered the peculiar mental state that had made her the most extraordinary shooter the Nightshade program had ever produced. Her consciousness expanded, perceiving patterns and relationships in the environment that others couldn't comprehend. The shot she was about to attempt would have been deemed mathematically impossible by conventional ballistics experts. 3 kilometers through variable mountain winds, striking a geological formation with precisely calibrated force at exactly the correct angle to trigger a specific localized effect without causing a larger catastrophic event. One shot, one solution, one chance to prevent a strategic disaster. 15 minutes to shift change. Morgan exhaled slowly, her fingers settling on the trigger with perfect pressure. Not enough to fire, but exactly the amount needed to eliminate any movement when she made the final decision to shoot. Through her scope, she could see the target area with preternatural clarity. The subtle variations in the rock face, the nearly invisible stress fractures in the geological formation, the precise point where kinetic energy would need to be applied to achieve the desired effect. 10 minutes to shift change. The world around her seemed to slow, her perception expanding to encompass the entire valley system. She could feel the air currents moving across her position, sense the minute vibrations in the earth, hear the subtle shifts in the acoustic environment that signaled changes in atmospheric conditions. In this expanded state of awareness, Morgan made 7 final microscopic adjustments to her aim point, each one reflecting calculations so precise that she couldn't have explained them to another human being. They existed in a mathematical realm beyond conventional language. 5 minutes to shift change. Infiltration team in final position. Morgan took one last breath, held it for exactly 2.7 seconds, then released half of it in a controlled exhale. In the perfect stillness between heartbeats, she applied the final 12 grams of pressure to the trigger. The Barrett fired its massive recoil absorbed by the precision-engineered platform. The 50 caliber round left the barrel at exactly 2,099 feet per second, beginning its 3-kilometer journey toward the target. For 4.32 seconds, the bullet traveled through space, its path affected by wind currents, gravity, air density, and a dozen other variables that Morgan had calculated with inhuman precision. It struck the geological formation exactly 0.7 millimeters from her intended impact point, a degree of accuracy that defied conventional ballistic mathematics. The effect was immediate and exactly as she had predicted. A localized disruption in the rock face triggered a cascading failure along the natural stress lines in the formation. A section of the mountainside approximately 2 meters wide and 3 meters tall broke free, sliding downward with gathering momentum. The resulting debris impacted precisely the 3 security system components Morgan had identified, disabling them without alerting the facility's central monitoring systems. To anyone inside, it would appear as nothing more than a minor natural occurrence, one of many in this geologically active region. Target effect achieved, reported the Delta team leader. Security systems showing localized failure consistent with the predictions, proceeding with infiltration. Morgan maintained her position, her breathing steady as she watched through her scope. The Delta operators moved with ghost-like efficiency, exploiting the precise gap in the security perimeter that her shot had created. Outer perimeter breached, proceeding to secondary objective. For the next 11 minutes, Morgan remained absolutely motionless, her rifle trained on the facility entrance, ready to provide covering fire if the infiltration team encountered unexpected resistance. Through her earpiece, she could hear the clipped professional communications of the operators as they moved deeper into the facility. Primary objective secured, initiating data transfer. Secondary objective located, placing charges. Hostile contact 3 neutralized silently, proceeding. Data transfer complete, beginning extraction. Charges set, 15-minute timer activated. 14 minutes after entry, the Delta team emerged from the facility and began their rapid exfiltration along the predetermined route. No alarms had been triggered. No reinforcements had been called. As far as the facility's security forces were concerned, nothing unusual had occurred beyond a minor rock slide on the mountainside. All objectives completed, extraction proceeding as planned. As Morgan began methodically disassembling her rifle platform, she felt a strange sense of completion. The shot she had just made, a shot that conventional ballistics experts would have deemed impossible, had enabled an operation that would prevent incalculable strategic damage. Yet she felt none of the pride or satisfaction that might have accompanied such an achievement in her earlier career. There was only the quiet knowledge that she had performed her role with a precision it required nothing more. 6 hours later, as the team reached the extraction point where stealth helicopters waited to return them to base, the facility behind them erupted in a precisely controlled explosion. The charges placed by the Delta team destroyed the critical technology while minimizing structural damage to the surrounding mountain. Another calculation of extraordinary precision. The defectors' intelligence had been confirmed. The stolen technology had been neutralized, and Morgan Reed had once again demonstrated why the Nightshade program had considered her their most valuable asset. But as the helicopters lifted off, carrying them away from the operation zone, Morgan stared out at the darkened landscape below with a strange sense of detachment. She had returned to the world she had tried to leave behind, performed the impossible tasks they had asked of her, and now faced the uncertainty of what would come next. Colonel Chase had promised her freedom after this mission. A clean record, a secured identity, the right to choose her next assignment. But Morgan had learned through bitter experience that promises made in moments of operational necessity often evaporated when the crisis passed. The debriefing took place in the same secure bunker where the operation had been planned. For 3 hours, Morgan methodically detailed every aspect of her calculations, every variable she had accounted for, every minute adjustment she had made to execute the impossible shot. The assembled intelligence officers and military specialists listened with expressions ranging from skepticism to awe. What she described shouldn't have been possible according to conventional ballistic science. The mathematics involved exceeded what their most advanced computer systems could model. The data retrieved from the facility confirms everything our defector told us, General Sullivan announced as the debriefing concluded. They were 6 months away from deploying technology that would have rendered our early warning systems completely ineffective. Your shot made it possible to prevent that outcome, Sergeant Reed. Colonel Chase stepped forward, placing a sealed folder on the table before Morgan. As agreed, Nightshade has been permanently decommissioned. All operational files have been sealed at the highest classification level. Your record has been cleared of all references to the program, and your identity has been secured against future compromise. Morgan stared at the folder without opening it, her expression unreadable. And my next assignment, that's entirely your choice, Colonel Chase replied. Any posting, any specialty, anywhere in the world. You've more than earned it. For a long moment, Morgan remained silent, contemplating options she had never expected to have. Throughout her military career, her extraordinary mathematical abilities had always defined her path, always pushed her toward the most classified, most demanding roles where her unique skills could be exploited to their fullest potential. Now, for the first time, she faced true freedom of choice. I want to teach, she said finally, her decision crystallizing with absolute clarity. Advanced ballistics and mathematical modeling at Quantico, not the classified techniques I use with Nightshade, but the fundamental principles that any sniper can apply to improve their capabilities. General Sullivan looked surprised. That's not what I expected. Your skills are extraordinarily rare, Sergeant. Are you certain you want to use them in a teaching capacity? Morgan met his gaze steadily. For 8 years, I've used my abilities to eliminate threats from impossible distances. I've calculated bullet trajectories that defied conventional mathematics. I've made shots that no one else on Earth could make. She paused, choosing her words carefully. But what happens when I'm gone? Do we just hope another mathematical prodigy appears, or do we take what I've learned, the principles, not the classified techniques, and use it to elevate the capabilities of an entire generation of snipers? Colonel Chase studied her with newfound respect. You're thinking about legacy. I'm thinking about effectiveness, Morgan corrected gently. One exceptional shooter can change a single operation, but 100 well-trained snipers with improved understanding of advanced ballistic principles can change the strategic landscape. But as Morgan began to gather her things ready to leave the secure facility for the last time, the door suddenly opened. A junior officer entered, his face tense with urgency. Colonel Chase, we have a situation. The encrypted communications we captured at the facility, they contained references to someone named Bauer. Lawrence Bauer. Chase and Sullivan exchanged sharp glances. What about him? Chase demanded. He's alive, ma'am, and it appears he was the one who sold out the Nightshade program 4 years ago. Morgan froze, the name hitting her like a physical blow. Colonel Lawrence Bauer had been her mentor at Quantico, the man who had recognized her mathematical gifts and personally recruited her for Nightshade. The man she had trusted absolutely. The man who had sworn the Kazakhstan operation was secure. Chase turned to Morgan, her face grave. This changes everything. Bauer knows all our protocols, all our capabilities. And specifically, he knows what you can do. And you told me the mole had been neutralized, Morgan said, her voice dangerously quiet. We thought he had been, Sullivan replied. The evidence pointed to someone else entirely. Morgan's mind raced, reassessing everything she had been told. If Bauer was alive, if he had been the one to compromise her team, then nothing was as it seemed. The facility we just hit, she said slowly. It wasn't just about the technology, was it? It was a trap for me, for any surviving Nightshade operative. Chase didn't deny it. We suspected as much, which is why we moved so quickly. But if Bauer is rebuilding the network we just disrupted, Morgan looked down at the sealed folder containing her freedom, then back at Chase. The choice before her was brutally clear: walk away now with what she had earned, or re-enter the shadow world to hunt down the man who had betrayed her team. The man who was responsible for the deaths of Rachel, Michael, Dominic, and Kate. The man who had condemned her to years of undeserved guilt. Tell me everything you know about Bauer's current operation, Morgan said, pushing the folder back across the table. Everything. As Colonel Chase began laying out the intelligence, Morgan felt something shift within her. Not just a renewed sense of purpose, but a cold mathematical certainty that transcended emotion. The kind of certainty that came from an equation with only one possible solution. Lawrence Bauer would soon discover that his greatest creation had become his most dangerous enemy. And this time there would be no variables left to chance. The most advanced human calculator on Earth was coming for him, and she never missed her target. The classified file on Lawrence Bauer spread across the conference table like the anatomy of a betrayal. 27 years of military service, distinguished career in special operations, recruited to the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency at 45, architect of the Nightshade program at 51, traitor at 54. Morgan studied the photographs, the man who had once mentored her, now a stranger through the lens of revelation. The same steel gray hair and patrician features, but she saw him differently now, calculating the variables that had led to this moment. The subtle signs she'd missed, the inconsistencies in his explanations before Kazakhstan. Intelligence suggests Bauer is operating from this compound in the Hindu Kush, Chase said, placing satellite imagery before Morgan. He's assembled a private force of former special operators, mercenaries with specialized training. And his objective, Morgan asked, her voice controlled despite the storm raging within. Sullivan's face darkened. He's not just selling technology anymore. He's created his own operation, recruiting mathematical prodigies, training them in advanced ballistics, building his own Nightshade program, but without government oversight or ethical constraints. The implications settled heavily in the room. Bauer was creating an army of calculators, people with Morgan's abilities, but without her moral compass. His last known communication mentioned something called Deadlight Protocol, Chase continued. We believe it's an assassination program targeting key defense and intelligence officials across multiple nations, creating chaos that his clients can exploit. He needs to be stopped, Morgan said simply. Agreed. Sullivan nodded. But conventional methods won't work. He knows all our playbooks, all our protocols. He designed half of them. Morgan stared at the satellite imagery, the calculations already forming in her mind. Approach vectors, security patterns, probability, matrices. I'll need a team, she said finally. Not another Nightshade unit. Something different. Chase looked surprised. What kind of team? People who think differently. Not just mathematical prodigies, but operators with diverse cognitive approaches. The opposite of what Bauer would expect. For the first time since Kazakhstan, Morgan felt a clarity of purpose that transcended personal vengeance. This wasn't just about avenging her fallen teammates. It was about preventing the creation of weapons that could destabilize global security for decades. I want to speak with Jack Rivers, she added. If he survived our last encounter with Bauer, he might have insights we need. Sullivan exchanged glances with Chase. Rivers is recovering at Walter Reed, Took 3 rounds in the chest during an operation last month. Doctors say he shouldn't even be alive. Then he's exactly who I need to talk to, Morgan replied. Someone who defies mathematical probability. The Walter Reed National Military Medical Center hummed with the quiet efficiency of an institution dedicated to putting broken warriors back together. Morgan made her way through sterile corridors to a private room in the secure wing reserved for patients whose very existence was classified. Jack Rivers lay propped against white pillows, his once powerful frame diminished by trauma and surgery. 3 bullet wounds to the chest should have been fatal. The medical file Morgan had reviewed calculated a 98.7% probability of death. Yet here he was defying the mathematics of mortality. They told me you were coming, Rivers said, his voice raspy but strong. The ghost calculator herself. Not a ghost anymore, Morgan replied, taking the chair beside his bed. They dragged me back in. Rivers managed a pained smile. Let me guess. Bauer, Morgan's eyes narrowed slightly. You knew, suspected, the op that put me here. I saw something I wasn't supposed to. A familiar face among the opposition forces. Someone who knew exactly where our team would be positioned. Bauer was there personally. Rivers shook his head, wincing with the movement. No, but one of his new calculators was. Young kid couldn't have been more than 25. Made a shot that reminded me of you. 600 meters, variable winds, perfect placement. Morgan felt a chill run through her. Bauer was already deploying at his trained assets. Chase wants me to hunt him down, she said quietly, but I'm thinking differently. I want to build a team, not just calculators, but people with different cognitive approaches. I want you to help me select them. Rivers studied her for a long moment. You're not thinking of just eliminating Bauer, are you? No, Morgan admitted. I'm thinking about what comes after, about changing the equation permanently. For the next hour, they discussed potential team members, specialists whose approaches to problem-solving represented diverse cognitive frameworks. A former Navy SEAL with synesthesia who saw sound waves and could navigate in complete darkness. A Marine Corps scout sniper with savant-level pattern recognition abilities. A disgraced CIA field analyst whose unorthodox methods had proven prophetic despite being initially dismissed. As Morgan prepared to leave, Rivers caught her wrist with surprising strength. Be careful, he warned, his eyes suddenly intense. Bauer didn't just train you in ballistics, he studied how you think. He'll anticipate your approach. Morgan nodded. That's what I'm counting on. He's expecting the old Morgan Reed, the lone calculator making impossible shots from a distance. And what will he get instead? Something mathematics alone can't account for, she replied. A distributed solution. 3 weeks later, Morgan stood before her assembled team in a secure facility beneath Quantico. 6 individuals selected not for their similarity, but for their differences. Cognitive diversity as a tactical advantage. Master Sergeant William Hawkins, her old mentor from FOP Sentinel, stood among them, his weathered face betraying no emotion. At 58, he was the oldest by more than a decade, but his expertise in unconventional warfare made him invaluable. Some of you know portions of what I'm about to share, Morgan began. None of you know the complete picture. That changes today. For the next hour, she briefed them on Lawrence Bauer, the Nightshade program, and the threat posed by Deadlight Protocol. She withheld nothing, sharing her own role, her failures, and her plan moving forward. Traditional special operations doctrine focuses on specialized units of similar individuals, she explained. Bauer knows this approach intimately. He helped design it. He's expecting us to deploy another Nightshade team of mathematical calculators like myself. Morgan gestured to the diverse group before her. Instead, we're going to deploy cognitive diversity against mathematical predictability. Each of you thinks differently, processes information differently, approaches problems differently. Together, we become an equation Bauer cannot solve. She activated the holographic display showing the compound in the Hindu Kush, where intelligence placed Bauer's operation. Our mission has 2 objectives. Primary is secure all data on Deadlight Protocol and Bauer's calculator program. Secondary, capture Bauer alive for intelligence exploitation. Hawkins raised an eyebrow. Capture, not kill. After what he did to your team. Morgan met his gaze steadily. Killing Bauer eliminates one traitor. Capturing him and dismantling his network eliminates an entire category of threat. This isn't about vengeance, it's about changing the strategic calculus. For 3 days, they planned, rehearsed, and refined their approach. Unlike conventional special operations planning, Morgan encouraged each team member to develop their own solution to the problem, then integrated these diverse approaches into a unified but flexible plan. On the fourth day, Colonel Chase visited their planning session, observing silently from the back of the room. When Morgan concluded the briefing, Chase beckoned her to a private conversation. "This isn't standard doctrine," Chase said without preamble. "Multiple simultaneous approaches, deliberately varied tactics, minimal centralized command and control." "Bauer will anticipate standard doctrine," Morgan replied. "He wrote most of it." Chase studied her for a long moment. "You're not just planning a mission, you're designing a new operational paradigm. Bauer believes in centralized excellence, the lone calculator making the perfect shot. I used to believe that too." Morgan's eyes drifted to her assembled team. "Now, I understand that distributed capability is more resilient than centralized perfection. 6 people making good decisions across a complex environment will achieve more than one person making a perfect decision." "And after this mission?" Chase asked. "Assuming you survive." Morgan's gaze returned to Chase unwavering. "Then we take what we've learned and transform how special operations functions, not just in this unit, but across the entire force structure." Chase nodded slowly. "You've changed, Morgan. 4 years ago, you were a weapon, the most precise we'd ever developed, but still a weapon to be aimed. Now you're something else entirely." "I'm a teacher," Morgan said simply, "one who understands exactly what happens when knowledge is concentrated rather than distributed." The Hindu Kush Mountains stood ancient and indifferent in Morgan's team deployed under cover of darkness. 6 operators, 6 different insertion methods, 6 different timelines. Deliberate asymmetry designed to confuse defensive algorithms trained to detect patterns. Morgan herself approached from the most difficult vector, a nearly vertical ascent up a rock face that Bauer's security systems would dismiss as impassable. Her fingers found invisible holds in the darkness, her body remembering the rock climbing training she'd received as a teenager long before MIT or the Marines. Her earpiece remained silent. Unlike conventional operations with constant communication, this mission operated on pre-planned synchronization points. Each team member functioned autonomously within the framework of the overall plan, making independent decisions based on ground truth rather than centralized command. At precisely 02:17 hours, Morgan reached her designated position overlooking the compound. Through her thermal scope, she observed the security patterns, noting the precision of the patrol intervals, mathematical regularity that betrayed Bauer's influence. Predictable because it was optimal, and vulnerable because it was predictable. At Arsha 2:30, the first phase began, not with gunfire or explosions, but with subtle manipulations of the environment. Specialist Connor Walsh, the former SEAL with synesthesia, deployed sonic disruptors at precise points around the compound's perimeter, not enough to trigger alarms, but sufficient to create acoustic anomalies that would confuse the pattern recognition systems. Morgan watched through her scope as the patrol patterns began to shift slightly, guards unconsciously adjusting their routes to avoid the discomfort of the acoustic disturbances. The mathematical perfection of their intervals degraded by 7.4%, just enough to create exploitable gaps. At 02:42, the second phase initiated. Former CIA analyst Eliza Thorne activated a sophisticated electronic warfare package, introducing minute errors into the compound's sensor grid, not enough to trigger fail-safes, but sufficient to create a growing cascade of false positives that would gradually numb the response protocols. Morgan observed the guard force responding to the third phantom alert in 10 minutes, their movements showing the first signs of the confusion that precedes tactical breakdown. Bauer had trained them well, but he had trained them to respond to conventional threats, direct assaults, sniper attacks, infiltration attempts. He hadn't prepared them for this gradual degradation of their security model. At 02:56, Hawkins made his move, the old-school approach that no modern security system would anticipate. Using techniques developed in Vietnam and refined over decades of unconventional warfare, he physically cut the redundant power supply to the eastern section of the compound. Not a catastrophic failure that would trigger emergency protocols, but a localized issue that would draw maintenance personnel into a predictable response. The mathematical beauty of the operation unfolded before Morgan's eyes. Not the perfect shot from an impossible distance, but the perfect orchestration of seemingly unrelated events that together created an emergent vulnerability in the defense system. At 0304, Morgan spotted the first signature of success. The security system's automated response protocols beginning to falter under the compound strain of multiple minor anomalies, none severe enough to trigger crisis measures, but together creating decision paralysis in the command structure. It was time for her role, not as the super calculator making an impossible shot, but as the conductor ensuring each instrument entered at precisely the right moment. "Execute Phase 4, she whispered into her comm system. Across the compound, her team initiated their coordinated breach. Not a simultaneous assault on a single point, but multiple small penetrations across the entire perimeter, each calibrated to exploit the specific vulnerabilities they had created. Morgan herself remained in overwatch, providing precise targeting data, balanced as needed, but otherwise allowing her team to execute their individual elements of the plan. This was the fundamental shift in her thinking, from the lone perfect calculator to the orchestrator of distributed excellence. Through her scope, she watched the confusion spread through Bauer's security force. They had been trained to respond to conventional threats with mathematical precision. They had not been trained to respond to this deliberate introduction of complexity and uncertainty. At 0317, Morgan spotted the first sign of Bauer himself, a tall figure emerging from the main building, gesturing urgently to his security detail. Even at this distance, she recognized his distinctive profile, the same commanding presence that had once inspired her trust and admiration. Morgan adjusted her scope, centering the crosshairs on Bauer's chest. The shot was well within her capabilities. 847 meters, minimal wind clear line of sight. She could end it now with a single trigger pull. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger, the calculation already complete in her mind. But she didn't fire. That would be the old Morgan, the weapon rather than the teacher. Instead, she keyed her comm system. Primary target identified, proceeding with capture protocol. The operation concluded with a precision that would have seemed impossible under conventional doctrine. Bauer's compound was secured, his data systems captured intact, and his personnel detained without a single fatality on either side. But the true measure of success came when Morgan finally stood face-to-face with Lawrence Bauer in a makeshift detention room within his own facility. The man who had mentored her, betrayed her team, and nearly destroyed her life sat handcuffed to a metal chair, his expression a mixture of resignation and calculation. "I knew they'd send you eventually," Bauer said, his voice still carrying the authoritative tone she remembered from Quantico. "Though I must admit your approach was unexpected." "That was the point," Morgan replied, taking the seat across from him. The table between them held a single folder, the evidence of his treason extracted from the compound's secure servers. Multiple simultaneous penetrations, deliberately varied tactics, minimal centralized command, Bauer mused. "Not standard doctrine, not what I taught you." "No," Morgan agreed, "not what you taught me." Bauer leaned forward slightly. "You've evolved beyond the calculator I created. Impressive if inconvenient for me." "Why did you do it?" Morgan asked a question she had carried for 4 years, finally finding voice. "Kazakhstan, the team. Why betray everything you helped build?" Bauer's eyes, the same steel gray she remembered from countless training sessions, met hers without flinching. "The same reason you're here now," he said. "I saw the logical conclusion of the path we were on. Nightshade was just the beginning. The government wanted to create more of you. Perfect calculators who could eliminate problems from impossible distances. Human weapons to be deployed wherever needed." He gestured with his cuffed hands. "I simply recognized the true value earlier than most. If one Morgan Reed could change the course of a battle, imagine what an army of calculators could accomplish. Nations would pay any price for such capability." "So you sold us out?" Morgan said, her voice steady despite the anger beneath it. "You gave the enemy our position in Kazakhstan. You sacrificed my team." "I gave your position to potential clients," Bauer corrected, "a demonstration of the product's capabilities. Your team's elimination wasn't the objective. Your performance under extreme pressure was." The cold calculation behind his words struck Morgan harder than any physical blow. Her teammates hadn't just died. They had been expendable elements in a sales demonstration. "You miscalculated," she said quietly. Bauer raised an eyebrow. "Did I?" You assumed I would either die in Kazakhstan or become like you, seeing my ability as something to be exploited for power or profit. You never considered there might be a third outcome. And what outcome is that? Morgan leaned forward, meeting his gaze directly. That I would understand the true danger isn't in the weapon, but in who controls it. That the solution isn't better calculators, but distributed capability across an entire force structure. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Bauer's expression. Your deadlight protocol, Morgan continued. Assassination programs targeting key officials. Your calculator training program. All built on the same flawed assumption that centralized excellence trumps distributed competence. She opened the folder between them, revealing the evidence they had extracted from his systems. We have everything, Bauer. Your clients, your operatives, your targets, your training protocols. It's over. Bauer studied her for a long moment. You think capturing me ends this? There are others who understand what I understood. That mathematics is the ultimate weapon. They'll continue what I started. I'm counting on it, Morgan replied with quiet certainty, because now we'll be ready with something they can't calculate against. As she stood to leave, Bauer called after her. What happens to me now? Morgan paused at the door. That's not my calculation to make anymore. 6 months later, the Advanced Ballistics Training Center at Quantico buzzed with a nervous energy that made the air feel electric. 24 Marine Corps Scout snipers, all combat veterans with exceptional service records, fidgeted in their seats as they awaited their new instructor. The door opened precisely at 0800 hours, and Gunnery Sergeant Morgan Reed entered without ceremony. She wore standard Marine utilities with no special insignia or recognition badges. Nothing in her appearance suggested someone extraordinary. Average height, athletic build, and eyes that assessed the room with quiet intensity. Gentlemen, she began without preamble, everything you think you know about long-range ballistics is approximately 60% correct. The other 40% is what keeps you from making the truly impossible shots. She activated the classroom's projection system, displaying a complex mathematical formula that filled the entire wall. This is not theoretical physics. This is the reality of what happens to a 7.62 mm round traveling through atmosphere at varying densities. Most of you were taught simplified versions of these calculations because the full mathematics was deemed too complex for field application. She paused, looking each student directly in the eyes. I'm here to tell you that your capabilities are being artificially limited by that assumption. Your brains are more powerful calculation tools than you've been permitted to use. For the next 3 hours, Morgan methodically deconstructed conventional ballistics theory, introducing mathematical concepts that made several students shift uncomfortably in their seats. She wasn't just challenging what they knew, she was rebuilding their fundamental understanding of physics, atmospheric science, and precision shooting. After lunch, she led them to the 1,000-meter range, where 24 rifles had been precisely arranged at the firing positions. The standard qualification for this distance gives you a 20-inch target, she announced. Today you'll be shooting in at 5-inch targets. The wind is currently varying between 8 and 14 knots from multiple directions. You have 1 round each. A staff sergeant raised his hand. Ma'am, with these conditions, hitting a 5-inch target at this distance isn't realistic for a first attempt. Morgan's expression remained neutral. The enemy doesn't care what's realistic, Staff Sergeant. They don't arrange themselves in 20-inch target circles because that's what you qualified on. She picked up the 25th rifle identical to those provided to the students and assumed a prone firing position. Before you attempt your shots, I'll demonstrate the principles we discussed this morning. Without using a spotter, without checking wind flags, without any of the usual preparation time that snipers typically required, Morgan fired a single round. The distant target, barely visible to the naked eye, showed an impact precisely in the center. That wasn't luck, she said calmly, standing and returning the rifle to its rack. That was mathematics applied with discipline. You all have the capability to make that shot. Not today, perhaps not this month, but certainly by the time you complete this course. She gestured to the firing line. Now it's your turn. Apply the principles we discussed. Treat the mathematics as seriously as you treat your weapons maintenance. None of the 24 students hit their targets that day or the next. By the third day, 2 had managed glancing impacts on the edge of the 5-inch circle. By the end of the second week, half the class could consistently place rounds within the target zone. Major Paul Harrington, the training center's commander, observed from the sidelines with increasing amazement. After a particularly impressive session where students were successfully engaging targets and at 500 meters in gusting winds, he pulled Morgan aside. Gunnery Sergeant Reed, what you're achieving here defies everything I've seen in 20 years of sniper training. These men are making shots that should be beyond human capability. Morgan shook her head slightly. With respect, sir, they're making shots that were artificially defined as beyond capability. The limitations were never physical, they were conceptual. She gestured towards a young corporal who had just placed 3 consecutive rounds into a 4-inch target at 700 meters. Corporal Jenkins there grew up in poverty in rural Appalachia. He taught himself advanced trigonometry because he wanted to understand why his grandfather's hunting rifle shot differently on cold mornings. He never had formal mathematical training, but his brain naturally thinks in ballistic trajectories. The standard training program was actually inhibiting his natural abilities by forcing him to use simplified calculations. Major Harrington looked skeptical. You're telling me that all these Marines are mathematical prodigies? No, sir, Morgan replied patiently. I'm telling you that the human brain is capable of far more complex calculations than our training programs have acknowledged. We've been underestimating these men because it was administratively convenient to standardize the mathematics. 2 months into the program, word of Morgan's unconventional methods and her students' extraordinary results had spread throughout the Marine Corps sniper community. Senior officers from other branches began requesting permission to observe her classes. Intelligence officials with clearances, Morgan recognized all too well, appeared occasionally in the back of her classroom, taking careful notes. She ignored the attention and focused entirely on her students, pushing them beyond conventional limitations, with a quiet intensity that brooked no excuses but offered unwavering support. During a particularly challenging night shooting exercise, Corporal Jenkins approached her with a question that went beyond ballistics. Permission to speak freely, Gunny, Morgan nodded, continuing to adjust the specialized night optics she was preparing to demonstrate. The shots you're teaching us to make, they're not standard Marine Corps sniper operations. He lowered his voice. These are Tier 1 operations calculations, the kind used for high-value target elimination at extreme distances. Morgan's hands paused momentarily on the equipment, then resumed their precise adjustments. Your observation, Corporal. Why teach us this? Why not keep these techniques classified for special operations units? She considered his question carefully, recognizing the intelligence behind it. Jenkins wasn't just a natural ballistics calculator. He was perceptive about the wider implications of what she was teaching. Because the next war won't be fought with the luxury of perfect intelligence and ideal shooting conditions, she answered finally. It will be fought by ordinary Marines like you making impossible decisions with incomplete information in chaotic environments. She finished mounting the optic and handed the rifle to him. The future of warfare doesn't care about our organizational charts or our classification systems. It only cares about capability, and I believe in democratizing capability wherever possible. Jenkins accepted the rifle with a new understanding in his eyes. Is that why you're here instead of elsewhere? The perceptiveness of his question confirmed Morgan's assessment of his potential. Precisely, Corporal. One exceptional shooter can only be in one place at one time, but 24 well-trained snipers who understand the true mathematics of ballistic trajectories can change the entire strategic equation. 4 months into the 6-month program, Morgan received visitors she had been expecting since the day she arrived at Quantico. 3 men in civilian clothing, their bearing unmistakably military despite their business attire, waited outside her office after the day's training concluded. Colonel Chase had sent her most persuasive recruitment team, men whose job was to identify and secure talent for operations that officially didn't exist. Gunnery Sergeant Reed, the lead man, began without introducing himself. Your work here has been noticed at the highest levels. The improvements in capability you've achieved with standard snipers exceed our most optimistic projections. Morgan gestured for them to sit, her expression neutral. I assume this isn't a performance review. The man smiled thinly. No, this is an opportunity. The techniques you're teaching here, the mathematical approaches, the environmental calculation methods, they clearly derive from your previous assignment. Everything I teach is unclassified. Morgan corrected him firmly. I've been extremely careful about that distinction. Of course, he conceded smoothly, but imagine what you could achieve in a more specialized environment with students already operating at the highest levels of capability, with access to technologies that don't officially exist. He placed a folder on her desk. We're establishing a new program, completely compartmentalized, unprecedented resources, direct presidential authorization, the mathematics of precision kinetic effects in denied environments. Morgan didn't touch the folder. You're rebuilding Nightshade under a different name. We're evolving beyond Nightshade, the second man interjected. The previous program was limited by available computing technology and outdated operational concepts. What we're proposing combines your unique mathematical approaches with next-generation systems that can extend human capability beyond anything previously achievable. The third man, who had remained silent until now, leaned forward. Gunnery Sergeant, the geopolitical situation has evolved significantly in the past 6 months. Capabilities we believed were theoretical are now being deployed in the field by our adversaries. The shots you're teaching these Marines to make, they're already becoming the minimum standard in certain theaters. Morgan listened without comment, her mind calculating probabilities and outcomes with the same precision she applied to ballistic trajectories. Your current contract with the training center ends in 8 weeks, the first man continued. We're offering you the chance to shape the future of precision warfare at the highest levels, with resources beyond anything available in conventional forces. And if I decline, Morgan asked quietly. The men exchanged glances. Then we thank you for your service and wish you well in your future endeavors. This isn't 2017, Sergeant. We don't disappear people who prefer to serve differently than we might wish. After they left, Morgan sat alone in her office, considering their offer with the detached analytical precision that had defined her military career. The folder remained unopened on her desk. She already knew what it contained: exceptional compensation, unprecedented operational authority, technology that blurred the line between science and science fiction, and the return to a world of shadows, secrets, and isolation. Through her office window, she could see her students on the practice range, working well past standard training hours to master the techniques she had taught them. Corporal Jenkins was helping a struggling colleague adjust his calculations as for the changing evening winds. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was methodically teaching a group of 3 how to account for humidity variables in their trajectory models. They weren't just learning, they were teaching each other, extending and expanding on the principles she had introduced. The following week, Morgan implemented the final phase of her training program, something she hadn't included in the official curriculum submitted to Major Harrington for approval. She divided the 24 students into 4-person teams and presented them with a challenge that went far beyond standard sniper operations. For your final evaluation, each team will be assigned a specific strategic target on the extended range complex. These targets are positioned in locations that conventional ballistics would consider impossible to engage effectively. Extreme distances, complex wind patterns, obstructed lines of sight. She displayed a map showing 16 targets scattered across more than 20 square kilometers of rugged terrain. You will have 48 hours to develop a mathematical solution that allows you to engage your assigned targets simultaneously at precisely 1600 hours on a Friday. Each team must determine the optimal firing position, calculate all relevant environmental variables, and place a single round on target at the designated time. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez raised his hand. Gunny, some of these targets appear to be beyond 3 kilometers with terrain features that create unpredictable wind conditions. The mathematics for those shots is exactly what you've been learning for the past 5 months, Staff Sergeant. Morgan finished for him. This isn't about demonstrating that you can hit what conventional wisdom says is possible. This is about redefining what's possible through rigorous mathematical discipline. For the next 2 days, the training center hummed with unprecedented energy as the 6 teams analyzed topographical data, calculated atmospheric models, and developed complex mathematical formulas to account for variables that standard sniper training didn't even acknowledge existed. Morgan observed without interfering, watching as her students applied and extended the principles she had taught them in ways that sometimes surprised even her. They weren't just reproducing her techniques. They were innovating, finding elegant solutions to problems she had deliberately designed to be just beyond their current capabilities. On Friday afternoon, as the teams deployed to their carefully selected firing positions across the range complex, Major Harrington joined Morgan in the observation post. "I've invited some guests for this demonstration," he informed her, gesturing to the convoy of vehicles approaching the range control building. "Word has spread about what you've achieved here. The Commandant himself is attending along with representatives from Joint Special Operations Command and several intelligence services." Morgan nodded without comment. She had expected this. It was in fact part of her larger strategy. At precisely 1600 hours, 24 rifles fired simultaneously across the range complex. 21 of the 24 rounds struck their targets, including all 8 targets that conventional ballistics doctrine classified as beyond effective engagement range. Corporal Jenkins's team achieved the most impressive results, successfully engaging a target at 200 meters through a mountain pass that created swirling, unpredictable wind patterns that changed direction vertically and horizontally along the bullet's flight path. As the distinguished visitors reviewed the results with poorly concealed amazement, Morgan quietly gathered her students back in the classroom for a final address. "Gentlemen, what you accomplished today isn't remarkable because of the distances involved or the complexity of the environmental conditions. It's remarkable because you demonstrated that so-called impossible shots are merely undercalculated shots." She looked at each of them in turn, seeing not just the snipers they had been when they arrived, but the mathematical pioneers they had become. The world is entering an era where precision kinetic effects will determine strategic outcomes, not overwhelming firepower, not massive force deployment, but the ability to place the right round in exactly the right place at exactly the right moment. Corporal Jenkins raised his hand. "Will this training be expanded to all sniper schools, Gunny?" Morgan allowed herself a small smile. "That decision is beyond my authority, Corporal, but each of you will return to your units with capabilities that exceed documented standards. How you apply those capabilities, how you share that knowledge, and how you continue to develop these mathematical approaches, that will determine the future of precision warfare more than any official program." Later that evening, as the distinguished visitors departed and the range fell silent, Morgan found herself alone at the 1,000-meter firing line where her program had begun 6 months earlier. The sun was setting behind the distant mountains, casting long shadows across the impact area where hundreds of thousands of rounds had been fired during her tenure. Major Harrington approached quietly, standing beside her as they both looked out across the darkening range. "The Commandant has authorized immediate expansion of your program to all Marine Corps sniper schools," he informed her, "and the Joint Chiefs are recommending implementation across all service branches. You've started something revolutionary, Gunnery Sergeant Reed." Morgan nodded, unsurprised by the news. "Mathematics doesn't care about service rivalries or bureaucratic boundaries, sir. It just is. The question now is what comes next for you," Harrington continued. "Your contract ends in 2 weeks. I have authorization to offer you a permanent position here with promotion to Master Gunnery Sergeant and complete curricular control." He hesitated before adding, "though I suspect others have made you more attractive offers." Morgan turned to face him, her decision already made with the same mathematical certainty she applied to everything in her life. "With respect, sir, I'm declining all offers to remain in a training position." Harrington looked genuinely surprised. "May I ask why what you've built here is unprecedented?" "Because the program no longer needs me," she replied simply. "What I've started here will continue to evolve beyond anything I could personally develop. The 24 Marines I've trained don't need me to tell them what's possible anymore. They're already calculating possibilities I haven't considered." She gestured toward the classroom building where lights still burned, as several students continued working on their ballistic models late into the evening. "Corporal Jenkins has already developed a mathematical approach to account for round-to-round manufacturing variations that exceeds anything I taught him. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez has created an atmospheric modeling system that operates on a standard tactical tablet and performs calculations I once believed required specialized equipment." "So what will you do instead?" Harrington asked. "I requested reassignment to 2nd Battalion 5th Marines," Morgan answered. "They're deploying to the Pacific Theater in 3 weeks as part of the new distributed operations strategy." Harrington looked perplexed. "As a sniper instructor, as a platoon sergeant in a standard rifle company," she corrected him, "leading 39 Marines with conventional weapons and standard equipment. That seems like a waste of your extraordinary capabilities, Harrington observed carefully. Morgan shook her head. The future of warfare isn't about individuals with exceptional skills, sir. It's about small units operating with distributed capabilities in complex environments. The mathematics of ballistic trajectories was just the beginning. The same principles apply to maneuver elements, to communications planning, to logistics optimization. She looked back across the darkening range, her vision extending far beyond the visible targets. The next conflict won't be won by solitary experts making impossible shots from distant positions. It will be won by small units of well-trained Marines making consistently correct decisions in chaotic environments. That's the real mathematics of warfare. Human factors, decision cycles, and probability analysis applied at the tactical level. As she walked away from the range for the final time, Gunnery Sergeant Morgan Reed felt a sense of completion that went beyond personal achievement. What she had built here would continue growing, evolving, and spreading throughout the military's precision warfare community long after her name was forgotten. The three men in civilian clothing waited beside her car in the parking lot, a final attempt to persuade her to join their classified program. "You're making a mistake, Gunnery Sergeant," the lead man said without preamble. "Your skills are wasted in a conventional infantry unit." Morgan regarded him calmly. "You're still thinking in terms of individual capability maximization. That's an outdated model for modern warfare." "Explain," he challenged. "The true power of mathematics in combat isn't about calculating the perfect shot from 3 kilometers away," she replied. "It's about distributing mathematical thinking throughout the entire force structure." 39 Marines who understand environmental analysis, probability assessment, and decision mathematics will achieve far more than one exceptional shooter no matter how accurate. She unlocked her car door. Nightshade failed because it concentrated exceptional capability in isolated individuals. The future belongs to distributed capabilities in network teams. That's the program I've actually been building here. Not just better snipers, but a new understanding of how mathematics applies to every aspect of modern combat. 6 months later, Morgan stood with her platoon on the deck of a transport ship approaching a small island chain in the disputed waters of the South Pacific. Intelligence had confirmed that 2 research vessels had been captured by an unknown force, their crews held hostage on an island equipped with sophisticated defensive systems. The island's defenses were oriented toward conventional threats: carrier-based aircraft, amphibious assault forces, or special operations insertions. But Morgan's platoon was already in position on neighboring islands, operating in distributed teams with minimal electronic signature. "Conventional wisdom would say this operation is beyond our capabilities," Morgan told the assembled Marines. "But conventional wisdom relies on outdated mathematical models that don't account for distributed operations in complex environments." She highlighted specific features of the island and surrounding waters on her tablet. "Their defensive systems are optimized to detect and counter traditional approaches, but they're mathematically vulnerable to what they consider statistically insignificant threats." For 20 minutes, Morgan outlined an operational concept that made the young lieutenant commanding the platoon increasingly uncomfortable with its unorthodox approach. She wasn't proposing a direct assault or even a covert infiltration in the traditional sense. Instead, she described a mathematically optimized distribution of minimal force elements approaching from multiple vectors, each individually too small to trigger defensive responses calibrated for larger threats. "This violates every principle of force concentration in the manual," the lieutenant objected. "The manual was written for a different era of warfare," Morgan countered respectfully. "Modern defensive systems use mathematical probability models to distinguish between background noise and actual threats. By distributing our approach across these 12 vectors with precisely calculated timing intervals, we can exploit the statistical thresholds in their detection algorithms." The operation proceeded exactly as Morgan had calculated. 12 four-man teams penetrated the sensor perimeter along mathematically optimized approach vectors. None triggered the defensive systems that would have immediately detected a conventional force. The defensive force, approximately 60 personnel with advanced equipment, found themselves responding to simultaneous small unit actions across the entire compound perimeter. Their defensive protocols, designed for concentrated threats, fractured under the distributed pressure. By 0412 hours, all 37 hostages had been secured. By 39 hours, the 12 teams had extracted from the island along mathematically optimized exfiltration routes that once again exploited the statistical thresholds in the defensive system's detection algorithms. Not a single Marine was lost. Total casualties among the opposing force: 3 wounded, none killed. As Morgan supervised the medical evacuation of the rescued scientists, she received a secure transmission. The voice on the other end was immediately recognizable. Jack Rivers, now recovered and serving as Colonel Chase's chief of operations. Impressive work, Morgan. You've just validated your distributed operations theory under actual combat conditions. The mathematics was sound, Morgan replied simply, and the Marines performed flawlessly. Chase wants to know if this changes your decision about the special program we offered. Morgan watched as her Marines efficiently processed the rescued hostages, each team performing their assigned tasks without direct supervision, distributed capability in action. My decision stands, she answered. The program you're proposing still concentrates exceptional capability in isolated specialists. What I just demonstrated proves there's a better approach. Rivers was silent for a moment. Lawrence Bauer was sentenced yesterday. Life imprisonment, no possibility of parole. Morgan felt a complex mixture of emotions at this news: closure, vindication, but no satisfaction or triumph. Did he say anything at sentencing, she asked. Just one thing, Rivers replied. She was right about the distributed solution. Chase thinks he was referring to you. After the call ended, Morgan rejoined her platoon as they prepared for extraction. A young private approached her hesitantly, holding a small wooden box. The platoon wanted you to have this gunny, he said. We had it made by a local craftsman on the last island. Morgan opened the box to find a brass compass. Unlike any standard military issue, its face marked with mathematical symbols rather than standard directional indicators. The symbols are the key principles you've taught us, the private explained, about distributed operations, environmental analysis, and probability assessment. We thought you should have something to remember that what you've started isn't just about one mission. It's about changing how Marines fight. As the transport helicopters approached to extract them from the island, Morgan felt a certainty that transcended even her mathematical calculations. The compass in her hand represented not just a personal journey from isolation to integration, but a fundamental shift in how warfare would be conducted in the coming decades. One exceptional calculator could change a single battle, but an entire force thinking mathematically would change the nature of warfare itself. And as she boarded the helicopter with her Marines, Morgan Reed knew that her greatest calculation had nothing to do with ballistics or trajectories. It was the simple recognition that true strength comes not from individual excellence isolated from others, but from excellence distributed throughout an entire system. A lesson as applicable to warfare as it was to life itself.